Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, in the past, we studied the benefits of isolation. When a person is by himself, how he's able to spiritually better himself. So, we spoke of that. Now, the author goes into the inner world. One, one would be the method. Let's just say a person is trying to change his heart. One would be the paint with which you brush, and the brush with which you paint, and the other one is the canvas. In the spiritual world, exact same thing happens. One is the different attempts we do at the heart to fix the heart. One is the heart itself, the canvas. So now the author gets into the heart. So he says, how can كيف يشرق قلب? How can a heart shine? صور الأكوان منتبعة في مرآته. When the pictures of the world are published or painted all over it. So how can the heart shine when the pictures of the world are all over it? In other words, if your heart is enamored by too many different things, how can you focus on the worship of Allah and the recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Sort of like a person who comes to a job, but he doesn't like that job. So that's why in the interview, what's that tricky question? Oh, why do you like this job? They always ask you that question because they want to see if you're really into it. Like Talha is not really into it today, so he's like, oh man, why the heck am I here? Right, Talha? So it's sort of like that. You're somewhere, but you're like, I don't want to be here. And meaning mentally, we're distracted, we'd rather be somewhere else. So that's how the soul is, that's how the heart is. If the heart is somewhere else, then a person keeps trying, but to no avail. And that's where I feel like most of our life we're struggling with. We know to be a good person, to be a spiritual person, to be a guided person, we know it has a lot of meaning. It has a lot of value. But we see that, oh no, but I can also achieve this. Oh, I can also have this. So we have other attractions that drive us crazy, and we're supposed to focus on one thing. So, like imagine a chef who's in the kitchen cooking, but they're distracted, keep looking at the TV or the phone. So over time, the meal is gonna burn because he or she is cooking, but they keep looking at the phone and whatever they're watching, and after a while they're like, I burned the meal. And that's exactly how life is. We're trying to make our heart a better place, but there's so much like attractions and distractions that we're not able to focus. And that's where the author is going with this next line. He says, how can you have a shining heart when the heart is completely covered with the pictures of the kawn? Kawn means like the world around us. So then it goes really deep into the three levels of the hearts: the common person's heart, the saintly people's hearts, and the extremely pious people's hearts. But obviously that's too advanced for us because we're all beginners. But the most I can say is sometimes ask yourself, what drives you crazy? What drives you like into infatuation? Generally for young guys, we know what it is. Right? It doesn't have to be said. Right? It's either the attraction to the opposite gender or some more money. And that's what drives us crazy. Right? And that's what keeps us thinking like, oh, how can I have a wife? How can I have marriage? And then the other thing is, how can I have more money? So that is basically what drives us crazy, and that's what keeps us always distracted. And that's and a good way to look at it and to summarize it to your own soul would be to tell yourself that the Lord, the Creator, He created a lot of distractions, but He wants me to focus on the Creator. So the Creator created distractions to a certain degree, and now He wants us to focus on the Creator. And that's where Allah, come on, come on. That's where Allahu Akbar comes from. Allahu Akbar, you're saying Allah is the greatest. And the point of that is to show us that there is a lot of things that can distract us and that can occupy my mind, but I know my Lord is the greatest. My Lord is the greatest. And that's why in the books of fiqh, they'll actually talk about it like, greater than what? They'll ask that question because Akbar is one of those terms where it's superlative, where better than. So the question would be like, what is Allah better than? So you'll say Allah is better than everything. Whatever occupies my mind, Allahu Akbar, Allah is greater than that. So if you got a game that you want to play and you want to pass, Allah is greater than that. If there's a certain degree that you want to achieve in life, Allah is greater than that. In a certain career, a certain level of popularity, certain level of whatever, recognition, Allah is better than all that. Then honestly speaking, even spirituality, when we go deep into the spiritual brain, how it works, you'll realize, I want to be like, the mind will tell you, I want to be religious, and then I want to be really pious, and then I want to help other people. And that's where the seniors will tell us that that is your problem. You are too focused outwardly. You're like a flashlight that doesn't want to shine inwards, it wants to shine outwards. And I remember an incident where a certain student, he says he went to a sheikh, he stayed with him for like 10 years or something, a big amount of time. And then the student after a while comes to sheikh and says, Sheikh, I'm going to go now, it's not helping. I stayed with you for 10 years, I don't feel spiritually any better, and I think that's the end of the journey. And the sheikh says, okay, you can go, but what was wrong with your intentions? Do you have any problem with your intention? He's like, no, I just wanted to be religious so I can help everybody. And he said, well, that's the problem. That was your problem. You were too focused on the world. You were too focused looking left and right. And that's what happens to all of us. Like I'm sitting here thinking, oh, I want to help these people. And that's the problem. That is the whole problem. You probably heard this funny, like a riddleish saying that if everybody starts screaming, be quiet, it gets louder. Like on a bus or in a class when someone says, be quiet, hey, and everybody starts screaming, be quiet, it gets louder. That's what happens in the spiritual world. I'm telling you, hey, be religious, man. You're like, no, man, you're the teacher, you be religious. You're trying to be all smarty by reading from the books, you be pious. And I'm thinking, no, I'm already pious by just reading from the book. You need to become pious now. So it becomes you do it first, or why don't you do it? And everybody's hopeful somebody will do it. Everybody's hopeful someone will do it. And that's where it never gets done. So that's why when we have believers that are extremely focused on themselves, believers that are overly focused on themselves, that's how we can have an amazingly powerful spiritual community, where the children, the middle age, the teenagers, the boys, the girls, the married, the unmarried, everybody becomes so religious because everybody is self-focused. They're directed inwards. SubhanAllah, very recently my teacher's teacher, my Sheikh, he passed away, may Allah have mercy on him, but we saw what some of his writings and they were shocking. He wrote that I used to be a person of good insight when I was a student, and then over time I became this community leader where I tried to help other people, and I realized I wasted my life. And he was the kind of sheikh that tutored hundreds of scholars, and he opened like 5 or so many institutes in England, like massive institutes. I'm talking about like large scale institutes where they're producing scholars every single year amongst the males and the female sisters and brothers. And in so many parts of Europe, his students are teaching Islam in so many like European countries. And in South America, he has scholars, and obviously all over Canada. And he says, I literally wasted my talents once I started becoming a religious guide for others. So can you imagine, like, he really meant it, like, I wasted my youth, I wasted my life. And he was so upset, like, I don't know what, Allah gave me good talent, I used to be so spiritual when I was young, I used to cry in my du'as, I used to make dua, I used to read Quran, and then suddenly I became this Maulana Sahib, and then I destroyed my life. So can you imagine somebody like that who's saying they had who outwardly had a like an amazing life, and he says, like, I destroyed my life. I destroyed all my gifts that God had given me, which Allah, and generally when you are younger, you have this extreme passion for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes this happens when you're like really young, like 12, 15, 17, you have this extreme iman, and then as you grow older, you're kind of told it's okay to be distracted. Then you're kind of told it's okay to be busy with work, it's okay to be busy with that, it's okay to be busy with that, and over time you realize, oh, people are all distracted, so it's okay to be distracted. That means sometimes the youngest people have cleaner hearts because they have natural fitrah. And that's why many sheikhs, they look at their life and say, when I was younger, I feel like I had more iman. So I guess it's good to sometimes travel back in our minds and look at a time when we were trying to be spiritual, but it was extremely personal. It was extremely personal, and there was no other structure involved. For example, you weren't part of a SMA or Muslim, what is it, MSA? You're never part of an MSA. SMA is the masjid, right? Yeah. So you weren't part of a MSA or anything. You weren't part of a tablighi effort or any mosque effort. You're part of nothing. You were just doing it only between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is where sometimes the best of us comes out. And we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's so like self-focused, self-centered. And that's what we need. We need people that are extremely focused on themselves and their own iman. So I'm just going to repeat the sentence. The sentence was, how can your heart be shiny or become enlightened when the pictures of the world are all over it? In other words, if your heart is imprinted by wealth, by passions, by different desires, then you're distracted. You can't really focus on worship. And then there's a saying amongst the saints that whoever enjoys words too often, as opposed to the spiritual ecstasy of worship, then he'll lose the worship sweetness and he'll get sweetness of the tongue. So in other words, whoever does more lectures, more talking, that person probably is going to lose the sweetness of worship. Because what ends up happening is he tries to beautify his words more than his spiritual state. So may Allah save us from becoming like fake candles that give light to other people, but they're standing in the dark. You know how when you candle standing in the room, there's a big circle of darkness around the candle? That can easily happen to our own lives. So may Allah save us from that. And then the author hints towards a few ayat and hadith. So one of them is, verily the heart becomes rusted the way steel becomes rusted and iron becomes rusted. And then the author reminds us of another ayat where it's hinting towards an incident where some people had a very not so bright idea. They said, oh, why don't we make a peace treaty with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? We will ask him that some days he should celebrate our religion, the mushrikeen, the Meccan religion with us, and other times we will celebrate his religion with him. So it will be like a peace treaty. 6 months will become like mushriks and 6 months will become Muslims. And the Quran said, like, Allah hasn't given any man 2 hearts in one chest. Allah hasn't given any human, hasn't given any man 2 hearts in his chest. In other words, how can you have 2 opposite beliefs? It's either one or the other. So the author is obviously not hinting to the historical event, but he's hinting towards having a split heart, where the heart is also attracted to dunya, but we're also hoping that the heart becomes attracted to spirituality. It's either one or the other. And that brings us to a story, a person who realized that wealth and being extremely enamored by materialism is a distraction. So he comes to his sheikh and he says, Sheikh, I have a decision to leave the materialistic world and I want to become like extremely spiritual. So I got rid of all my wealth, and the last bag that I have, it's like, for example, he gives his bag, goes, Sheikh, I have a few coins in here, you can take these. And I want to donate them to you, so you can take care of yourself, and the rest I'm done with, I'm just going to stay by you. And the sheikh goes, okay, but then you got rid of the world, why are you giving it to me? So he's like, you take it back and just get rid of it, throw it away. So sometimes they're so spiritually high, they'll just literally throw away stuff, like wealth. So this person felt like, okay, so I'm going to be on a spiritual high, I'm going to take all this wealth, I'm going to throw it in the ocean. So he goes up to a water body or whatever, and he starts taking the coins. So he's like, one, and he's throwing it one by one into the water. And then the sheikh sees that and says, wow, you took a while to get rid of materialism from your heart. Meaning the amount of seconds you took, that means you're still attached to all these coins, these silver coins or gold coins. You're holding them tightly and throwing it one by one. That means you love it. You have this attachment. That's why you're throwing it one by one. You're not going to be able to purify yourself. You're too materialistic. You're too materialistic because it took you a few minutes to get rid of the dunya that's in your hands. So you're not going to manage it. So you carry on. You're not coming to me. So obviously these are extreme highs. The most we can take from these stories is to see how serious the journey is. Like imagine going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the summary of our life is that, yeah, we were kind of religious, but we were really distracted by dunya and money. Imagine if the angel writes down the conclusion, this guy tried hard, but he just was really focused on work. That's a summary of his life. Like imagine if the angel summarizes our life, and there's another ayat in the Quran that says the human himself will be able to judge himself. كَفَى بِنَفْسِكَ الْيَوْمَ عَلَيْكَ حَسِيبًا. You're a good hasib over your own self. You judge yourself. How would you judge yourself? And once you look at your own report card and your own results, you're like, whoa, 90% of the time I was distracted. Oh. So imagine how many distractions we have. So it becomes really uncomfortable when we look at the reality. And sometimes do this when you wake up from the morning to the night. Once you're done your day, look at your day retrospectively and ask yourself how many things were materialistically based or selfish by nature. For example, I went to work because I want the money. I ate because I want to benefit. And sometimes they're not even for family members. They're so centered for ourselves, there's very little for family even in it. So, and by the way, I don't want to make you feel all guilty because you're coming from work, so please don't feel bad. I'm going to give you the summary of after Zohar also, so you get a balance of both. Because I know you guys must be feeling bad, like, yo man, this darn sheikh is telling us our works are not good. So let me give you a summary of after Zohar. Otherwise you guys are cursing me like, yo man, this darn guy, he tells us to come to Dars. He's just being rude to us. Right? So after Zohar, we talked about this also, that a believer doesn't have dunya and deen, he just has deen only. Honestly speaking, when you go to work and your intention is spiritual, you're not going to dunya, you're going to deen. We cannot call that dunya. That's why in Surah Jumu'ah, it mentions when the call to the Jummah is made, come leave your bay', leave your business transactions, and come to the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Come to the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now that the dhikr is done, and the khutbah and the salat is done, it then mentions you may go back and go seek the grace of Allah. And you can go now and seek the grace of Allah. And the Mufassirin mentioned grace of Allah means go back to work. Back to the grace of Allah, the fadl of Allah. Fadl is a really big word. Go back to the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala call it business when it's before Jumu'ah, and after Jumu'ah Allah called it the fadl of Allah? just to signify that if it's distracting you from worship, then it's business. If something distracts you from dunya, then it's bay'a, is dunya nature. But if it's not distracting you, then it's the fadl of Allah, it's the grace of Allah. So when a person has the right state of mind and the right understanding, his work is not really dunya, it's more deen. And the hadith mentions spending money on your family is twice as rewarding as charity. You know how seriously we take out sadaqah and say this is sadaqah, $20, I'm putting it in charity. If you're spending $500 on your family, that's more powerful because you're getting the reward of $1,000 in charity. So the deen is very, very straightforward. Make the right intentions in your worldly earnings and it becomes deen for you. The only time our worldly earnings become a problem when we show off with it. That's where the deeni part becomes back to dunya again. Many, many times, for example, a person bought a house in the halal or the halalest way possible. But now he keeps taking pictures, sending it to everybody who hasn't bought a house yet. And constantly invites people that are not able to buy a house. And he says, oh, look at my house, look at this, look at that. And he's just constantly mentioning it. So now that hurts because he's instantly putting it in people's heads like, oh, I bought it, I got it. And that's why the hadith mentions a horse is for three reasons. And one of them is to cause pain to others. So when you have a fancy ride or a fancy house, one of the bad intentions a person can have is to hurt his contemporaries, people that are your age who haven't bought a house, but you're showing them your house now because you want to make them feel jealous. Or you bought a car and you want them to feel jealous, so you keep taking pictures of your car and putting it as your display picture on social media. So may Allah save us from that twisted mind where we show off with our wealth and try to hurt other people with it, because it's very unhealthy towards our intentions and our akhirah and the barakat of our lives. And the sentence that we read today, it continues into how can you journey towards the recognition of Allah وَهُوَ مُكَبَّلٌ بِشَهَوَاتِهِ, when you are fully engrossed in your passions, in your pleasures. So as long as someone is extremely captivated and caught up in his distractions of passion, then he can't really focus. Like imagine a person who loves being seen in worship or loves seeing the opposite gender. So now he's coming for Jumu'ah. Both of those happen. He sees other people watching him, so he prays extra long because everybody's watching him. And after Jumu'ah, he's just checking out the opposite gender outside. So basically, the Jumu'ah becomes hell for him because spiritually, he showed off to everybody before Jumu'ah. And after Jumu'ah, he's distracted by the opposite gender outside the masjid. So suddenly, his spiritual journey is completely gone because he's so distracted by passions and desires. And the author continues, and how does he hope to enter the divine presence? And how does he hope to enter the divine presence when he has not purified himself from the impurity of distractions? And how does he hope to enter the divine presence when he has not purified his impurities of distractions? And the author plays on some interesting words here, and he mentions janabat. Janabat is the state where a person needs to go take a like a farah shower. So if somebody had a wet dream or whatever the equivalent of that, so now the person has to take a farah shower. So the author is saying that outwardly we do that, but inwardly also, if a person is spiritually dirty, then he needs to wash himself, clean himself, so that way he can feel clean. Just like how a person who is in need of a farah shower should not be entering the masjid because he's in need of a farah shower, the author is hinting towards that fiqh ruling. He's saying, how can you enter the divine presence when you're inwardly in a state where you need to take a spiritual cleansing. So janaba he mentions, and tuhur he mentions, which we generally use for wudu and showers, but he's using it for inward purpose. And then the author goes into an ayat which is mind-boggling. He mentions in the beginning stages of Islam there was an ayat which hinted that alcohol is about to become haram, but it wasn't yet haram. So the ayat said, do not come to salat when you are intoxicated. Which meant that if there's a big gap between salats, you could drink alcohol, and once the effect is gone, you can come back to the mosque and pray. So the ayat technically says, do not come close to salat when you are drunk, until you know what you're saying. So the author is implying that ayat to mental intoxications. So if you're high off of money, half off of passions, desires, and worldly things. So he says, how are you coming to salat when you're intoxicated with the madness that drives you crazy about dunya and whatever it may be? So in other words, purify yourself and then stand up in salat. Then he mentions there's two levels of purity. One is the wudu and one is the tayammum. And he says, spiritually speaking, there is two levels. One is partially, you just get a good understanding, like, yeah, it's dunya, I shouldn't be distracted by it. So just a minimum understanding. He's like, that's tayammum, where you kind of know what's happening, what's clean and what's dirty, and you're keeping your heart clean. And then he says the other one is where a person actually makes a wudu and doesn't just use the sand to clean himself, but actually a wudu. The equivalent of that is where a person, he actually is clean in his heart and mind, and then he comes to worship. In other words, let's just say from now till Jummah, we have no dirty thoughts, no thoughts of materialism. So now the person is praying and he's in a clean state. He's not just fighting his instincts, he's actually has some type of a control, and he's keeping his mind clean. So that would be the slightly higher state. That would be like a wudu. And the lesser state would be a tayammum, where a person knows what is right and what is wrong, but he hasn't been able to get a good control over it. But we'll stop there, but I'll mention one very big disclaimer. Generally, we think that if we keep trying to be religious, then a time will come when we'll become extremely pious and we'll have no distractions and nothing, no sinful thought would ever cross our mind. That doesn't happen. That stage never comes. Because we are so innately human that even when we're clean-minded, if something dirty comes in front of us, it's gonna affect us. For example, you have no dirty thoughts, but you see somebody perversely dressed. Is that gonna put dirty thoughts into you? Yeah, but you never meant it. You just wanted to be clean as an angel. You wanted to go pray namaz and that's it. You had no distractions. But somebody very dirtily dressed in front of you walked by. You're like, oh God. Suddenly you had bad thoughts, but you never meant it. You never came out of your house thinking, I'm going to be staring at somebody in a bad intention. So, unfortunately, our times are so bad. People are dressed very awkwardly. And even when we have good intentions, we might get bad thoughts sometimes. So, I'm talking about the state where a person doesn't intend on sinning, but he's clean-minded, but shaitan still puts bad thoughts into him. Then don't go crazy. Don't be like, oh, I never changed for the last 5 years. I've been trying and I haven't changed. Don't hate on yourself. Don't hate on your human instincts. Your human instincts are going to be there for you. Just keep trying. And the highest level of change, I think, is la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, where you hand over all your spiritual matters to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, Allah, it's really hard. You're going to have to help me every single step of the way. Otherwise, we think like, oh, after a few days, I'm going to master this. And it doesn't work like that. You think you can master yourself, but you realize, no, there's no such thing as mastering. And I was watching a professional, like one of a Muslim professional, talking about how to avoid some of the common sins of today time, especially pornography and all those kind of things. So one of the things he mentioned, which was really deep, he said, when a person avoids his addictions, he shouldn't tell himself, yes, I did it. Because the part of the brain that is triggered, the self part of the brain, when that becomes triggered and it gets excited, it has more ego now. So the next time you're confronted with that sin, if your ego is more stronger because you told it like, yeah, you're the one, you stopped yourself. The next time the ego becomes more stronger. So you might fall into that sin now. Because you said, oh, I'm very strong. And once you call yourself strong, you're kind of telling yourself, I can't control myself, I'm too strong. So he says, don't ever tell yourself you were able to avoid sins. Attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected me from sins. And if you keep doing that, your ego won't get stronger in avoiding the sin, but your tawfiq is getting stronger all the time. So that way, inshallah, we can avoid the sin, but also not have this negative side effects of avoiding a sin, which is the ego that kicks in afterwards. So last time in the other book, we had spoken about the finality of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And now the author gets into the book that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent. The Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It emanated from him without modality in expression. He sent it down to his messenger as revelation. So what he means by this, without modality, meaning there's no comparison in the way the Quran was revealed. So you know how a human talks, we say, oh, so-and-so talks like so-and-so, but the Quran was not revealed in that way. So you can't really compare the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to anyone else. Otherwise, it goes downhill. You say, okay, then if that case, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke the words, does that mean he speaks? And if he speaks, then does he have human parts or part like human? So it just goes downhill from there. That's why the Aqidah specialists, they just say it is speech and we stop right there. We don't let the imagination play because our imagination is so limited to humans. We try to imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be like us and it never works. So it just goes downhill and suddenly we start thinking like as if they're inspiration, but it's mostly childish thoughts. The believer accept it from the Prophet as absolute truth. They are certain that it is in reality the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The word of Allah is not created as is the speech of human beings. So the speech of humans is a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the Quran is also a speech, but because it is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is not created. So, in other words, the speech of humans, that we say words and so on, they are part of creation. But the words of the Quran, they're not part of creation, they're part of the Creator. So they don't fall on the human side, they fall on the Lord's side. So how you would say that is, even if a guy is reading the Quran, at that moment when he's reading it, it becomes humanistic words because a human is reading it. So if I, for example, if I cough throughout my reading, then instantly I'm stopping. So that means the words that I was reading, they were affected by human traits. If there's less oxygen, I won't be able to read. If whatever, right? You get the point. If my breath falls short, I'll stop reading. So that is my words, stuttering and so on. But the words that were revealed are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when I say them, they become my words for that moment. It's like copying somebody else's quotations. So it's his words, but you're saying it at that moment. So it's exactly like that. It's the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while a human is saying it. Is that complicated or does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Make sense, guys? Any okay. And thus anyone who hears it and alleges that it is human speech has disbelieved. So anybody who says the Quran is the words of a human, then that would be kufr. And then the author hints towards a certain verse, verse number 26 in Surah Muddathir, where the ayat mentions qawlul bashar. A disbeliever, he was talking about the Quran and he said, oh, this is nothing but the words of a human, meaning the Prophet. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned afterwards that we will punish him in a specific part of hell. So the author hints that the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala condemned what that person said, when a person said, oh, this is just the words of a human, then that's a sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is clearly telling us that Quran is his words. And why the author has to specify so much is because in the beginning stages of Islam, there was a big debate, academic debate, where some of the scholars thought that it could be said both ways. The Quran is the words of humans or the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal saw a big problem with that. Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, he saw a big problem with that, and he started saying, no, I don't think that's right. We should say Quran is the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not the words of humans. And some scholars gave in, and because that politically became really complicated, because that time religion and politics were extremely mixed. So some of the scholars said it's okay, don't be bothered, just say yeah, it is the words of it's the Quran is Allah's book, but it's the words of a human. It should be fine to say like that. Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal said, no, I don't think that's right to say that. And then he was jailed, he was beaten, he was whipped really, really hard in jail many, many times because they tried to make him change his words, but he never did. And that's why it becomes a big debate in some of these. Although for all of us, because we never saw this debates over us, it's easy to understand.
So there was an incident where like one Sahabi was writing Quran and he said Subhanallah or something like that. Prophet ﷺ asked him to write that.
Yeah.
So if someone asks us, we can explain that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired him to say those words, and that's why they became the part of Quran.
No, we don't have to say it that way. When he's hinting towards a really complicated incident, let me quickly explain the incident. So the incident is that there was some really powerful verses in the Quran talking about the embryology, how the baby goes through stages, how the baby is just a lump of meat, a little bit of blood, and then so on. The baby becomes a piece of flesh, then bones grow within the embryo, and so on. So the ayat was revealed, and the person who was the writer, he started writing. So he wrote, and finally, out of shock, the writer, he praised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in some really powerful words. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, yeah, those are the words, write it down. They are part of the wahi. And he was confused, like, wait, but I just said them. And the words were, فَتَبَارَكَ like Allah is so blessed. Or Tabarakallah, Allah is blessed. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, write that word and finish it off. Tabarakallahu ahsanul khaliqeen, Allah is blessed, the best of the creators. And the person said, no, but I said those words. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, yeah, but they're part of the wahi that I was about to say. So that's where I think a good way to understand this would be there's other parts in the Quran where that word is already used. So if the author knew those words already, he's just repeating it from that part of the ayat and he's reading it here. So that's possibility. And the other thing is humans, when they are in a clear state, they're heavily inspired. So if you are having a very clean mind, you'll have really good thoughts coming through you all the time. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, in every nation there's those who are inspired, and if there was anybody who was inspired in my nation, it would have to be Umar radiallahu anhu. So all the time people will be inspired, good things. And there's a hadith that shows as Qiyamah comes closer, you'll have dreams that are extremely clear. In fact, the hadith says a time will come when your dreams will not get any mistakes in it. It will always be right. So generally when we read the hadiths, it mentions as Qiyamah comes closer, things get worse. But this is one hadith that says the opposite also happens throughout the dreams. Your dreams become more clear. So in other words, sometimes humans do get inspirations and very good thoughts, and we should not exaggerate them and start thinking, oh, I'm reaching extreme wilayat and friendship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't go too far, because at the end of the day, He's your Lord. He'll put good thoughts into your head. Don't claim nubuwwat. Don't claim to be a prophet or extremely pious person. If Allah puts good thoughts into you, don't be too amazed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us clearly in the Quran that He even inspires animals to behave in certain ways. The word is used, your Lord inspired the bee to do its tasks. And the bee, if you study the bee, they're weird creatures, they're so deep, and they actually give maps to each other. If a bee knows where the nectar is, it actually does a little weird dance, and it shows the other bee how far to fly in which directions, and then the bee watches the other bee go, oh, and then actually goes to the flower exactly how far it is, and it knows where to go. So if a bee can be inspired, and the word uses wahi, like a biological type of wahi, So if Allah can give wahi to animals, why can't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give wahi to other His better creation, the humans? So we should never exaggerate it, because it becomes a arrogant state. A person says, "Oh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put this in my mind." So we should not do that. And the last thing would be for young people who are always doing istikhara on who to marry. Don't take your dreams too seriously, because sometimes you might be just dreaming about her, and you might be thinking it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it might not be. So that happens a lot to guys who are looking to get married. So they'll say, "Oh yeah, I like this girl at work, so I'm gonna do istikhara." And then because he's dreaming about her all the time, he starts seeing her every night, and he thinks, "That's the istikhara, Maulana. Like I'm telling you, that's the girl." But I see a lot of problems. You're like, "Don't do it, then, man." He's like, "No, but because you've seen her, you're like, oh, she's so beautiful. I have to marry her, and it has to be from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It can't be my own ego." So it's just, as humans, we sometimes see good dreams, other times we just see whatever we thought of. So even if you're praying istikhara, don't be fooled. Istikhara sometimes becomes a big confusion for many people, because they feel like it was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it has to happen now. So don't let istikhara mess up your decisions. You can make the istikhara, but the hadith that mentions istikhara also mentions mashwara, which is consultation. So if you know the situation of that family, the girl, talk to someone that's mature and understanding, and talk about the situation. She wants to do this in her life. Her career ambitions are this, this, this. Her outlook on life is like this. Once you go through all that, then you'll be able to make a good decision, not just a blind istikhara, 2 rakats and your own little fantasies at night, and then you want to marry her. It doesn't work like that.
That's a common dilemma, not just for at the marrying time, that suppose you're trying to switch jobs, or you're
Yeah.
doing something, for example, and then you're thinking that, yes, I've done the mashwara, but should I still do the istikhara or not? That's a common dilemma. Like, where do you strike a line there? Like, you do
The
mashwara
hadith-
with people, and everything seems right to you.
Yeah.
Right?
So I think the hadith mentions a matter that's really important. So if it's a big deal, you should take it very seriously. If it's little things that you do every single day, then I don't think you have to take it too seriously. For example, you're an investor. You're investing a couple of hundred every week. So now every week you're doing tons of istikharas to see if you can put that money into a certain investment. Like, that's going to be too much of, it's not a big decision, just do it.
Yeah.
Because that's part of your daily life. You're investing every
Yeah.
single morning.
Okay.
So don't let it drive you crazy. If it's a big deal, yes, you can take it seriously. Anything else? Otherwise, we're done.
And then with istikhara, is it necessary that we see a dream?
No, it
Right.
doesn't have to be.
Okay. And like, is it okay if I am inclined towards a decision,
Yeah.
then I do istikhara, and
Yeah.
then I just go regardless of if I see a sign or not?
Yes.
Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So once you're done your istikhara, you can continue. The main thing is using our sound mind. Yeah. Jazakumullah khairan, guys. If you have any questions, you can ask. Just turn that off, please. Jazakallah, guys.